Ladies and gentlemen, you are now entering the Decent Christian Talk podcast. Enjoy.
Decent Christian Talk, episode number 109. What's up, everybody? I'm Gabe Jones.
I am Josiah Jones.
This is a show by the fans for the fans.
Well, wait, what?
God, I'm so bad at that. Sorry.
That was my moment.
All right. Well,
by the fans for the fans. Yeah, you got whatever.
Yeah. And we've got a great show for you today. This is actually part one of a great series that we're going to be doing. We've been doing some of this this year already, going through bands' catalogs and talking about, some of our feelings, some of our thoughts.
Yes. And what are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about the Newsboys of the 1990s.
The 1990s?
Yes. And on a future episode, we'll be talking about the Newsboys of the 2000s.
Are we going to dedicate
2000 through 2009
a show to the 80s?
Well, we'll talk about that a little bit. We're going to set a good background because there is not enough in the 80s to really talk about. But we'll cover that today. And we'll also cover something really special in our bonus Patreon episode for both of these shows. We're going to be talking about one of the Newsboys albums that's very, very near and dear to us. It is an album called Take Me to Your Leader.
Ooh.
How about that?
I love that album, and we might talk about that here in a little bit.
Yes, we're gonna break that down track by track, and I'm excited about that because it's one of the for a long time Newsboys fans. That's just one of the iconic albums looking back. And we've never really talked about that yet, so on Patreon. So why not?
Here we go.
All right, so this is a big subject. This is why we had to split it up in multiple episodes because, when people think about the Newsboys today, I'm amazed by the amount of people that don't know about their history. I just think, okay, these are the guys that sing "God's Not Dead."
Yeah, and they're very famous, and they have movies, and they headline tours, and most recently, Newsboys United has put out some stuff. And so you might ask some questions, where are these other guys coming from? And this is a band that has been out since the mid-'80s.
Yes.
I do have a question, though.
All right.
You mentioned the bonus episode. How do I listen to that bonus episode? This is a part of the show that maybe you're out of practice with.
I am very out of practice. Patreon.com/Decent Christian Talk. And for as low as $1 a month, you can support our show. And for $5 a month, you can get our bonus episodes. And today, our bonus episode for this series will be the discussion about the Take Me to Your Leader album. We're going to go more in depth on that. And we also have a $10 a month club where people can get physical music delivered to their address. It's incredible. How about that? Physical music.
Yeah, and it's music that you can choose. So yes.
And and that's just, not only are you supporting us, you're supporting an artist. So that's awesome. And every dollar that you spend goes to supporting us, keeping us on the air, helping us pay our bills. It costs money to host things online and various things, keep equipment updated. Speaking of equipment, where are we?
We're in 13 Palm Trees Podcast Studios.
Yes.
Everything has been sanitized.
They are a great host.
They are a great host, and everything is clean.
If you are in the West Virginia area and you're interested in podcasting, check them out.
And they are Newsboys fans as well.
Yes.
Back to our show.
All right. So do you have any more questions before we dive in?
No, I think you mentioned a very good point. And a lot of bands, such as Toby Mac, who's part of DC Talk, Michael Tate, who was part of DC Talk, Kevin Max, who was part of DC Talk, they're the people that are headlining the industry right now, but maybe not a lot of people know the origin story, and we're going to go a little bit into that. Where are the Newsboys from originally?
Originally, they're from Mooloolaba, Queensland, Australia.
Wow.
And they were, actually, when they started out, it was Peter Furler and George Perdickus. They were friends. They went to school together. It was just a garage band. Back in the day when people liked to play music together, they got in their garage and they played music.
Yes, and they thought, hey, let's take this show on the road to...
Well, we're not there yet.
Oh, okay.
So they haven't met the other bandmates yet.
Oh, okay, continue.
So they met John James not too long after that, and Sean Taylor, who would play bass. And so...
Not the same Sean Taylor that used to play for the Washington football team.
Yes. Not the same one. You're right. Peter Furler, drummer. George Perdickus, guitar. John James, vocals. Sean Taylor, bass. And they decided to call themselves The News.
The News?
Yes.
Okay.
That was their first name.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so they decided, you know what? I don't know. At some point, they said, you know what? There's a band out there in the world called Huey Lewis and the News. So they said, let's fix that and let's become the Newsboys. Which later there's another group called the Newsboys, isn't there? Only the S is a Z, and I don't know.
I did not know there was a second Newsboys.
Yeah, it is. I don't know a whole lot about it, but they're out there somewhere. Anyway, yes, as you were saying, at some point in around 1987, they decided to make the trek to the United States, and they released an album. Well, at some point, they had some kind of, a release that is really hard to find in 1987, around the beginning, called He's Coming Back. I don't know anything about this album.
I did not know that either. That's not in my research.
So this was an independent release. This was like, they probably were still in Australia then, and I'm sure somewhere this exists, and I don't know, might be on YouTube, I don't know.
Peter Furler probably has it locked down.
It's possible. So, like I said, they came to the United States, and they signed with a label called Refuge Records in 1988. We're not going to talk about it too much, but they released a record on that label called Read All About It. And that's pretty much all. I'm not going to really go into it too much because...
Well, I will mention that...
We're just setting the stage for the 90s here.
Shortly after they came to the United States, they've always mentioned how big a deal that the Creation Fest was for them. And their first Creation Fest was the infamous Mud Fest.
In 89.
Where it rained and poured and rained and poured.
So that was the summer after Read All About It.
Yeah. But that was a big deal back in the day. Festivals are where you heard about these bands. There wasn't really a place where you could just go on the internet and find the Newsboys. So they kind of got a nice little word of mouth.
Yeah.
Circulation.
Like I said, they released Read All About It in 1988, December of 1988. Played at the Creation Festival. I think they just showed up. They weren't on the schedule or anything. And so that was in the summer of 1990, like around the end of June. And the very next month in July, well, I'm sorry, I misspoke. A year after that, in July, well, okay, let me back up. So they play at the festival in 89, right?
Yes.
Okay. The festival, the people that ran the festival invited them back for the summer of 1990.
Yes.
And they played, late June. They probably played the side stage at the T-shirt booth at 12 o'clock or something.
Yes.
I don't know. But, they were picking up some steam, probably got invited to a couple other festivals. They released Hell is for Wimps in July of that year, in 1990. Here we are in the 90s, and they're starting to play some festivals. They signed a deal with a label called Star Song, and their first release on that is Hell is for Wimps. Came out on July 31st, 1990. George Perdikis, by this point, was not in the band. So at that point, the lineup was Peter Furler, John James, Sean Taylor, and a guy named Jonathan Gange. At that point, so Wes Campbell, well, we might talk about him a little bit in this, not too much, but he has kind of been the guy that came over from Australia as their manager. He's been their manager ever since. At that point, Wes Campbell was more, he was more involved with the actual writing, and
I see a Corey Campbell on here too. I don't know if they're any relation.
Okay,
but
you mean Corey Pryor?
No, it says Corey Campbell.
Okay,
wrote In the End with Peter Furler, John James, and Sean Taylor.
So I want to talk about that. Hell is for Wimps. There's they have one music video for this album. It's called Simple Man. There's probably Simple Man, All I Can See. There's not a whole lot of other songs on this that I really want to listen to.
So I was under a year old when this album came out.
Yeah.
So I do not know much about it. It is worth a listen to maybe once, just to kind of, get the feel for what the Newsboys were. And I was listening to it earlier, and it kind of is what Christian rock music was.
Well,
and that's what it is what it is.
That's a
right
good point, because if you look at the songwriters on this album, one of the notable names is Billy Smiley, who was in Whiteheart at the time.
Yeah.
And you can hear a lot of that influence in this album.
Like Whiteheart and just a bunch of bands that we grew up listening to because of our dad.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I got some Petra vibes from some songs. I got some, just some 80s rock.
There's a lot of hair band in this.
Christian music definitely had a sound.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not throwing shade at Whiteheart or anything like that, but I think if they stayed on that career trajectory, they're probably not around today.
And it's no fault, like you said, it's not Whiteheart or anything like that. It was the Newsboys. It seemed like they were trying to fit into a sound that wasn't theirs necessarily.
Yeah, it didn't seem genuine to them.
So it especially when you see where they've gone since then.
Yeah. So,
but if you listen to this and you go back through the annals of history and listen to some other Christian music at that time, that's what they were doing.
I really like Simple Man off this, and I think if you listen to that song, you can kind of hear where they wanted to go. But and we'll talk a little bit about that on the next album. Do you want to just go to it?
Let's move on.
Yeah. Boys Will Be Boys, released the very next year in 1991, August 9th. Jesus Freak Hideout has it at 3.5 stars. Might be a little high if you ask me, but
Kingdom Man is definitely is the first track on this album.
Yes.
And that's one that I've probably listened to the most on this album. You sent me the music video for One Heart, which I have never seen before.
Oh, man.
And if you have never seen that music video, go watch the music video from One Heart from the Newsboys. I don't know how you found it. It's, like I said,
I went down the wormhole.
There's some good old-fashioned 90s dancing in it. And the song's not bad. It kind of, it kind of has a sound to like what some people are putting out today. Now, there was a weird little part where John James tried to rap in it.
That's Peter Furler.
That was Peter Furler?
Yes.
Okay. They all have Australian accents. Yeah. It's hard for me to keep up. I didn't necessarily like that part, but the rest of that song kind of is catchy.
Yeah. So, just to keep the continuity together, John James, Peter Furler, Sean Taylor were all still in the band at the release. Vernon Bishop was now on guitars. Corey Pryor was on keyboards. Corey Pryor does some really fantastic dancing in that video that we talked about. Bizarre dancing.
I think that's the best song to come off of this album is Taste and See.
Okay.
And the remix.
The remix or the real version?
I remember listening to the remix version growing up, and that was this is the first time I remember the Newsboys. When did this one come out?
1991.
1991. So I was what? 3 years, turning, whatever math is, 2. So I was 2 years old. And, but I have memory of Taste and See as one of the songs we listened to growing up. And so this is my earliest, fondest memory is Taste and See remix.
Back in the day, there was if you go watch the video for Kingdom Man, they also have, Newsboys are famous for their spinning drum, but they had a spinning drum kit back then.
Yeah.
That was even more bizarre, if you ask me. And they show that in that video.
It goes completely upside down, doesn't it?
Yes.
So that's one thing that kind of made them famous, and we can...
Yeah, their show was incredible.
We can mention that here is, if you've never seen the Newsboys live, Gabe did not misspeak. The drum set turns completely upside down in the middle of their concert during a drum solo, and today it has evolved to... they have a drum set that...
More of a pinwheel.
It turns on its side and spins very quickly. So it's something that I've seen 1,000 times, and it never gets old. That's the part where
Duncan might disagree with that.
Duncan probably hates it, but Peter Furler, I don't know who's coming up with this. I know I've met the man that came up with this.
Oh yeah, I know who came up with it.
And they came to our town one year, and I got to help set up the light show, and I got to help set up the drum set. I helped attach it. And one, I was terrified because some of those nuts and bolts that I helped attach could have sent Duncan flying all the way into the ocean. But I thought, this is so cool that I'm kind of seeing the behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah.
And this is where they started it with this album. And they had giant robotic arms that used to go out over the crowd. They had blimps. They've had they were always at the forefront of entertainment during the show. I know I've seen motorcycles doing backflips and the giant dome, which didn't work out. But hey, it wasn't a bad idea in theory. But the Newsboys, like I said, they were playing shows at festivals and gaining traction because they were so good at what they were doing.
Yeah, so this album, they started getting some traction, but there was still, I don't know, there was still something missing. I think a lot of people thought.
I know what was missing.
I think it was a step in the right direction.
I know exactly what was missing.
Yes.
So, are you going into the next album?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, so this is what was missing. And as I was listening to these albums in chronological order, we came to the album Not Ashamed, which was released September 29th, 1992. Yeah. I listened to the first song, and I said, I bet this is the one that Steve Taylor came in on.
Yep.
And I looked it up, and yes, Steve Taylor is a co-producer on this album with Peter Furler. And I think Steve Taylor is a very underrated person as far as producing goes, because producers don't really get much of a name.
And he's a songwriter on this too.
He's a songwriter as well. But Steve Taylor is an unsung hero in the annals of Newsboys history, which a lot of people don't know.
Yeah. So on this album, at the very beginning when this album is released, like you said, September 29th, 1992, Jesus Freak Hideout gave it 3 stars, less stars than Boys Will Be Boys. Again, no, I don't agree with that.
I can disagree with that as well.
But
I'd say it's at least half star.
A lot of these have been done, looking back. They weren't, Jesus Freak Hideout wasn't around in 1992.
Yeah.
John James, Peter Furler, Sean Taylor, Corey Pryor are are there when the album releases. You mentioned the Steve Taylor relationship begins with this album. This also is the album where Peter Furler begins to sing lead vocals on some songs.
Yes.
And we start to see that happening. There's a lot of people that are beginning to collaborate with the Newsboys that you'll see a lot over the years. You see John Painter, who plays bass on a lot of these songs. Fleming McWilliams, his wife, is when you hear a female singer on these songs, that's her.
Okay.
I didn't know that.
I went down the rabbit hole from this album, and I started listening to Newsboys. Then I started listening to Steve Taylor.
Yeah.
And then I found something I've never found before, which is a Steve Taylor tribute album.
Oh, yeah.
And Fleming and John were on that. So
yeah.
that's kind of cool that you see that come full circle.
Yeah.
Sixpence None the Richer was on that as well, which...
Well, Steve Taylor discovered. Well, kind of. Not discovered them, but...
Yeah. So, again, Steve Taylor.
Did. So you will find, Not Ashamed was the song that brought them to the table. And I should mention that there's quite a few videos that come from this album. I think I Cannot Get You Out of My System was the first one. And the reason I say that is because Jody Davis was not on that music video, but he was on the video for Not Ashamed and Dear Shame and Where You Belong, Turn Your Eyes. So Jody Davis is now in the picture.
Yes.
And he's the guy who's actually the guitarist today. So
he's the only... So this is where we introduce, I guess Peter Furler's back with United.
Yeah.
But so Jody Davis is in the picture, and he's one of the current band members today. So if you go see the Newsboys today, your guitar player is Jody Davis.
Yeah. So, and this is an album where we start to see a lot of other collaborations. It's unique that they covered Boycott Hell from DeGarmo Key. Strong Love was actually, check out the songwriting contributions on this song.
Toby McKeenan, never heard of him.
Yeah, Steve Taylor and Peter Furler. How about those three guys writing a song together?
That's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. How many albums those guys have been responsible for producing and just
I didn't even think about the production standpoint.
Yeah.
There's probably thousands of artists and bands and albums that could be attributed to the production side of those three guys as well.
Yeah, so like I said, I'm Not Ashamed was kind of the song that brought them a lot of notoriety and people started noticing them on a bigger scale. I remember the music video for I Cannot Get You Out of My System. It played on every Christian music countdown forever, it seemed like.
That's one of my favorite songs off this album, for sure.
I remember hearing Dear Shame and Strong Love and Upon This Rock on the radio a lot during this time. And if you go and watch the video for Dear Shame, it's kind of bizarre.
I've not seen it.
Yeah, check it out. It's on YouTube. Where You Belong, Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus is unique, I think, because this was one of the first times where they showed that they could, they know how to rock, but they also know how to do like a worship, oriented music. And that's kind of the first time I realized that they could do that. And they took an old song called Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus and made it kind of like a pop song.
Yeah, it was the chorus of their song.
Steve Taylor even raps on this album. How can you not love that? He raps on Boycott Hell. He has a great line in there. I agree we can boycott hell, but we got to boycott bad lyrics as well.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. So, this album really, this is when they started really hitting their full steam. Started playing every festival. And then in July 26th, easy for me to say, July 26th, 1994, Going Public came out.
This is their earth-shattering moment where you can look back through history and say, okay, Jesus Freak was the song for DC Talk, and Big House was the song.
I would look at this kind of like, it would be hard to compare that, because I don't know what I was going to go with there, but like I would almost say this was their Free at Last album, almost.
I think this is their Jesus Freak with Shine, right there, and Big House. Like I said, that, and those three bands have always kind of paralleled in my head to me, because they had the same time frame that they were kind of making their arc. And of course, the Newsboys have evolved since then, and they're different now. But I think this is their launch point, where they went from that's a pretty good band, and like you said, they were gaining some traction on the radio and all this stuff. But Shine came out on this album and was everywhere. It was the song, and still is one of their songs that they even sing today.
Yes, it is their
Big House.
Yes,
their big song.
I think it's possible that they've had bigger songs, but it's harder to find. It's hard to find one that was more impactful.
I'm sure God's Not Dead has done more numbers and stuff like that. But this, how many albums did this sell?
Well, that's a very good question. Before we head into all of that, we need to talk about the band lineup. John James, Peter Furler, they're still there.
Yes.
Jody Davis, like I said, he has joined the band after Not Ashamed came out. A guy called Duncan Phillips has now joined the band.
Yes.
But he's playing keyboards.
He had a contraption that a good friend of ours, Gary Starn, used to call, I think, what did he call that? No, whatever the guy's name, the yard sale.
Yeah.
You played.
Well, that would come on the next album.
Okay, but I just remember that's my earliest memories of Duncan was. Yeah. And if you're a percussionist,
well, so
you know what the yard sale is.
Not even the next album, because Jeff Frankenstein, not long after this album came out, became a touring member of the Newsboys. So he would take over keys, and Duncan would move to the yard sale of percussion.
So let me describe the yard sale. You know, the thing with every single percussion instrument you can think of, and it's just set up on a table, and there's everything that doesn't fit on the drum set. That's what Duncan would play.
Yeah.
And I think it helped give them kind of a unique set-apart sound. It's also, along with the keyboard, that it kind of set them apart. And then it also gave Peter Furler the opportunity to step out of the drum set from time to time and sing while, I don't know, John James took a water break or whatever. And then Duncan would step into the seat and play the drums.
Also, Kevin Mills played bass on this album. Kind of a short stint for him. He left not long after that. And even you could see, if you go watch the Shine, the music video for Shine, at the very end, Phil Joel was actually in the music video. Kevin Mills actually became the road manager for Whiteheart not long after this. And tragically, he died in a motorcycle wreck in 2000. So rest in peace, Kevin Mills. But I remember hearing about that. That was really tragic. Steve Taylor is a big part of this album. This album actually won Rock Album of the Year at the 25th Annual Dove Awards. Shine won the award for Best Rock Song. In 2006, CCM Magazine released a countdown of the top CCM songs of all time, and Shine ranked number 9 overall. And they also did a special in 2001, Best Albums of CCM History, and this album made it to number 70 overall, which I think it should be a little higher, if you ask me. But
yeah, so again, if you're listening to this and you're more familiar with what the Newsboys are doing today, go back and listen to this album.
Yes.
Because it is critical in the history of the Newsboys. And some of my favorite songs, Real Good Thing, starts right off. Shine, Spirit Thing.
Yeah.
Just going all the way down. Let It Rain is a great song. Truth and Consequences. Lights Out was my jam growing up. I love that song so much. So LG is one that is kind of...
Yeah, it's a deep cut that
it's like cult classic.
A lot of, and we'll talk about a really big one on the next album.
Yeah.
But when fans talk about Newsboys deep cuts, LG is up there near the top. And I love Jody's guitar playing on that song, by the way. Little fun fact, the album cover is actually a picture from a tent meeting, like a church meeting in Germany, post World War II. So, and this song's about going public, and you think about what happened in Germany during World War II, and what just the response that what people must have felt like going to a church event after World War II in Germany must have been pretty spectacular. So I thought that was cool that
I feel like that's a Steve Taylor touch.
Probably.
I also, on this album, it started on the last album, but the Newsboys have really kind of stepped into their wheelhouse here as far as their sound goes. Where we mentioned before, they sound a little bit cookie cutter. I feel like this album, they really kind of stepped into their own as far as I can think of just the guitar riff on Spirit Thing. And it's just, it's catchy. It's good. It's really good.
Yeah, and the keys on that are Newsboys iconic to a T. It's funny, the very first single off this album, you wouldn't think, but the very first single they released off this album was Be Still.
Huh.
And that was a big song for them when it came to like contemporary music. And then Shine was like the song for Christian rock radio, which is hard. It's really weird to even think about Christian rock radio right now. But anyway, people wondered, hey, they've evolved from kind of a hair rock band into more of like a Euro rock on this. Where are they going to go next? One thing they've shown thus far is they can evolve. So they proceed to release probably their heaviest album, their grungiest sounding album to date, on February 20th, 1996. And that album is called Take Me to Your Leader. And at that point, the lineup, this is the biggest album. This is the biggest the band will ever be until, I guess, United comes. John James, Peter Furler, Jeff Frankenstein, Duncan Phillips, and Phil Joel. This band was pretty much intact not long after going public, but this was the first time that they were all together
on a recording.
So, we're talking probably 94, 95 since the band has been all together intact with the lineup that they have today, minus.
This is probably my favorite lineup of the Newsboys.
Oh, yeah. I agree.
And we'll get into it in a minute. And my mind often thinks about where the Newsboys would have gone if this lineup had stayed intact for even 10 more years.
I don't know. That's a good question because they've shown that every album to this point has sounded different.
Yes.
And that's one thing that you'll see with the Newsboys, at least through the 90s. I don't know. We'll talk about the other decade on another episode. Jesus Freak Hideout gave this album 4.5 stars.
They came out swinging with God Is Not a Secret.
And this is and we'll talk more about their actual touring starting now, because this is when they were main eventing arena tours.
Yes.
And I remember, so it's funny that you mentioned that song because that's a song, still at this point, Peter Furler and John James are splitting vocals.
Yes.
And at that point, I don't remember Peter Furler coming out from behind the drum set. Like, if he had a song to sing, he just had a microphone.
Yeah, above the drum set, which is very difficult to do. Yeah. And you can think about how many people do you know just off the top of your head that sing from behind a drum set? Family Force 5 used to do it.
Yeah.
Skillet.
Under Oath.
Under Oath. That's very difficult for them. Skillet.
Reliant K.
Oh, I didn't realize Reliant K had some from behind the drum. But I know Aaron Gillespie has talked about it, where you don't think, oh, I've got to ease up on this drum part so that I can hit this note.
Yeah. He
said we write the drum part and then I try to figure it out from there. So I always thought that was kind of unique for the Newsboys, that they had a microphone right above the drum set.
But now that we have Duncan, who can play drums in the band, we now have the capability to bring Peter out from behind the drum set for some songs. And I remember on this tour, he actually came out and sang these songs. God Is Not a Secret, Breathe, Let It Go, which we will talk about really soon.
I remember...
Or Lost the Plot.
We saw them in Pittsburgh. And where does Duquesne play basketball?
It was the Peterson Event Center.
Okay. Was that it? Okay.
Yeah.
So we saw them there. This is when Peter Furler had a blonde mohawk. And that was the only way that I could tell the difference between John James and Peter Furler, because they sound the same to me.
I disagree with that, because I remember as being a very know-it-all kid, that the stage presence between John James and Peter Furler at this point were significantly different.
Well,
like, Peter Furler was still trying to figure that out.
John
James was comfortable with just doing whatever he wanted.
John James was a good, charismatic person. Yes. But that's just one thing I remember is Peter Furler had hair at this point, if you know who Peter Furler is.
Yeah. It was starting to be a losing battle at this point.
I think he got rid of it shortly after.
Yeah.
But their Australian accents on these albums made it very difficult for me to tell them apart, which just kind of speaks to how good both of them were at being a vocalist. And so, at least in my head. But yeah, he did step out from behind and sing. I remember very specifically inside of this arena we were in, they had a giant pirate ship, blimp looking thing that floated.
A spaceship.
No.
Yeah. Take me to your leader.
I've seen the spaceship, but they also had a blimp that went over the crowd for the breakfast song.
Right. It was a spaceship.
Was it?
I sent you the video.
I mean, I was a young child.
Okay.
But the spaceship aspect, let's get into that a little bit.
Yeah.
So for their big shows, we talked about upside down drum sets. We talked about cranes and all this different stuff that they did. For this tour, the Newsboys arrived in a spaceship.
Yes.
Which is no small feat. It was incredible to behold.
It was fun.
And when I say a spaceship, I mean... All right, so we talk about Creation Festival a lot. How tall is that stage?
It's pretty tall. And the thing is, the way that it was set up, they pretty much descended from the rafters of the stage on these platforms.
And they had a light show, and they came in hot and hard and heavy.
But the way they had to do it at the end was they went back up, but then they had to come back down awkwardly and get off. After
it would set up. It would take 30 minutes.
It took a while
for them. They would put a black curtain in front of the stage, and they would set it up.
The fun thing is the platforms, when they came down, after they came down, they went back up, and they were actually like the screens on the back of the stage. It was fun.
They were ahead of their time.
So it's worth noting on this album also, Phil Joel started to sing a little bit. He sang on Breathe, The Benediction, and Peter sang on a lot of these songs, and one of the ones that he sang on that, for me, is the best Newsboys deep cut of all time is a song called Lost the Plot.
I remember very specifically at the same show that we were listening to, that we're describing now, at the Peterson Event Center, there was a group of people there, and I remember asking the guy, "What's your favorite song?" And he said, "Lost the Plot." I remember thinking he was an idiot because how old was I? I was 7 years old when this came out. So for me, Cup of Tea was the song I wanted to hear. Good. I wanted to hear them sing Shine. I wanted to hear them sing Lights Out, which I believe they sang most of those songs. So God Is Not a Secret, I mentioned. You mentioned this is one of their heaviest albums. So I was all about those songs.
Yeah.
And then that's the first time I can even think about Lost the Plot. And I remember Peter Furler came out and played on his guitar. The spotlight was on him.
Yeah, it was just him starting the song out.
It was an incredible song. And even at age 7, I was like, okay, I understand why that guy liked that song.
Yeah.
And now it's my favorite Newsboys song of all time.
Yeah. It's fun. It's funny how things kind of transpire because when, kind of getting ahead of things, Peter Furler left the band in 2009, 2010. And when he started playing some solo stuff, he started incorporating that song into the set. Like, of all the songs, there were some other Newsboys songs that he did, but he actually went on the record of saying in these shows that this was the best song he's ever written.
Well, yeah, and he even mentioned a few times that some people were on Twitter relentlessly bothering him. Twitter was a new thing here.
I don't know what you're talking about.
So he mentioned in some live shows that people on Twitter keep bugging me to play this song live, so here it is, and cannot confirm or deny whether or not that was us. But yes, we were on Twitter almost daily saying, "We're going to see you in this town, play this song," and he very fondly mentioned us.
Yeah,
it was a nice little shout out. I enjoyed it,
and it was so fun all these years later on the first leg of the United tour to see them play this song. Like, of all the songs that they chose to play, there's so many more songs that probably had more radio play, but when they hit the Peter Furler set, there was a lot of songs that they played a verse and a chorus and went to the next song. They kind of was going through some songs really quick, and this is kind of inside baseball here, but they played this song entirely, and for those that have seen this back in the 90s and the United tour, there was quite a video show going on behind it that really told a great story for the song, and
you can find it on YouTube.
You can.
It's just
I don't think 90% of the people there on the United tour even had heard that song before.
No, and I remember we were there for a United tour, and I just remember you saying, "Can you imagine, like, never hearing the song before and just kind of getting smacked in the face with some of this?" Because it's the Lost the Plot song is exactly what it is labeled, is we've lost sight of what we're here to do, and it's a very powerful song. And you're mentioning Inside Baseball as well. If you have not heard our Michael Tate interview, go back in the annals of our history. And fun fact, we recorded, so they're playing their set.
Yep.
And we set up an interview with the Newsboys. We also set up an interview with Phil Joel that day. And Michael Tate did not have enough time, and we thought, you know what, we recorded with Phil Joel, and
it was a good day.
It was a good day. We get to see the concert. That was exciting. So we get a message that says, "Hey, Peter Furler is about to go on and play his set." Michael Tate normally takes a water break because it was like a 25.
It was a long show.
It was a long show, long show, and so 25 songs or whatever. Peter Furler plays 10 in the middle. He says, "Hey, during Peter Furler's set, Michael Tate's going to do your interview." So we had a set amount of time, and we did that from the Newsboys bus. That's one of the highlights of my life.
Well, and that took place, like, we went and watched Peter Furler's set, and there I knew, like, I roughly knew what the set was going to be. And they played this song, and it was at the very conclusion of this song that I got the text to come back.
So,
and I had, like, tears streaming down my face while watching this. And I was like, how am I going to even do this right now? So we booked it and went on the tour bus as Peter finished his set. So yeah, that's a fun story. I'm glad we got to see that. All right.
So just to mention, I know we've kind of overall mentioned, but God is not a secret. Take me to your leader. Breathe. Reality.
We should mention, breakfast.
Breakfast.
And the reason why I don't want to go too much into this because we're going to talk about a lot of this on our Patreon.
Yes.
Show. So check that out on Patreon.
But they have some big heavy hitters here, is what I'm pointing to.
Yeah. So Step Up to the Microphone, 1998.
Then what happened?
June 30th. Well, I want to set the stage for this. So the band goes into the studio, and this is kind of the rumor and innuendo, to quote a fellow podcaster. The band goes in, they start recording this album called Step Up to the Microphone. I don't know if that was the actual title of the album at the time. And I don't know how far they made it into recording the album. But at some point, the band made a decision that John James, he was gone. He was done.
Yeah. And I remember as a kid, this was earth-shattering.
Yeah.
I could not believe that one of my favorite bands had lost their singer, and to my knowledge, that's it. You're done. And
yeah,
I didn't realize that bands like Petra had switched singers. Of course, it probably wasn't headline news then, but Christian media had this is probably the peak of Christian media in the 90s, and it kind of, as far as music goes, Dove Awards were a big deal. Now they're not really a big deal now, but that was, they were on TV, which was a big deal. So John James, which he has come out and talked about, I believe he's written a book. I've seen him give his testimony on tour, had been dealing with alcoholism as well as other things.
Heroin, a lot of things. I mean, it was crazy to hear that story, but at the time we didn't know that. We
had no idea.
The way that it was presented was he just...
In retrospect, Peter Furler stepping out from behind the drum set may have had a lot more to do with John James being unable to perform. I know they talked about sometimes...
he wasn't sober.
They had to point him to where the stage was.
Yep.
And, I mean, it's a really, really sad story, but one that is happy now because he's come out the other side and he is... better off, and like I said, go look up his book. I don't know the name of it. I'm sure you can find him speaking.
You can find him speaking on YouTube. Yeah.
So, but this was a big deal. What's going to happen? Of course, like I said, I was 7 when that last album came out, and then so in my head, I'm like, well, how are they going to continue? Yeah. I remember you describing to me, okay, Peter Furler is going to sing, and this new guy, Phil Joel, might do some singing. Duncan's going to go behind the drum set. They're going to try to make it work. I was afraid.
Yeah. So, on a side note, if anybody has John James's contact information, contact me because I've wanted him to be on our show for so long. I've always wanted to talk to that guy. So anyway, they got to go back in and re-record a lot of this album because and I've always wondered I've always wondered, somewhere this has to exist. John James singing some of these songs. I've always kind of wondered what that sounds like.
That would be interesting to hear.
But yeah, Phil Joel takes over a lot of lead vocals. You hear that on Woohoo. You hear that on one of the most iconic Newsboys songs ever. Maybe my favorite song ever, Entertaining Angels.
I would say that as far as the Peter Furler era goes, that's their song, and their Entertaining Angels is their headline song, which I didn't realize until just now. Jody Davis is a writer on that song.
Yeah. and this lineup that's on this album is going to be the lineup going forward for a while. Phil, Peter, Jeff, Jody, Duncan. That's the band. If you go back and you look at a lot of these albums, a lot of these albums are done in-house. The band is doing the programming, the engineering. They're playing on these albums. This album specifically, weirdly enough, we see this album. Steve Taylor starts to not write as much. He only wrote on 2 tracks on this album. He doesn't write on any on the next album, which we'll talk about really soon.
He'd kind of taken a back seat overall as far as his own career goes as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure he was busy. This was when Sixpence blew up.
Oh, yeah.
He was busy with that. I'm not sure what led to that, but that's just what happened. Newsboys, they released a long-form music video of their One Night in Pennsylvania, along with this album. The tour, I think it was, Third Day and The Waiting was the backup to Atlanta bands. And that was one of my favorite tours that they did. I think it was their peak when it came to touring.
But yeah, Step Up to the Microphone, was that the first song that they released? Or was it Entertaining Angels?
That's a good question.
I just remember hearing the song Step Up to the Microphone and all the fears that I had of them not being able to hold up after the lineup change. I thought, wow, this song is incredible. And it kind of gave me like a hope that they're going to be that good.
Yeah, Entertaining Angels was the first song that came out on this album. Fun fact, I actually got to attend the album release for this because it came out
I remember
the week of creation, June 30th, 1998. So me as a young kid got to go to the album release party.
I also remember in a much later interview, Peter Furler talked about, as you did, the production of this and how expensive it was, how much time and effort and money they spent. And then he said, this is something you can get on GarageBand now, which comes with every single computer. The software and all that stuff that we had to get to make this album sound as good as it did is
accessible to anybody
now. So it's just kind of cool to see how music has changed, even from something that was not that long ago.
All right, so Step Up to the Microphone is, it's a lot softer than Take Me to Your Leader. I think some people were a little disappointed with that.
I definitely was.
I think at first I was, but,
Truth Be Known, Everybody Gets a Shot was one of the heavier songs that I enjoyed.
They brought the drum solo back for this tour, and it looks a lot different. Like we said before, it's kind of the pinwheel now, and it also took the form of like competing drummers. So what was I gonna say? With Step Up to the Microphone, I don't think the album sales was as high as Take Me to Your Leader. And so, but it was also more of a radio-friendly album. Like Entertaining Angels, it's not a mistake that became as popular as it did, because that was geared more towards adult contemporary. But not that it didn't get any play on Christian rock radio, which, it did. It was number one. But it was quite a successful track for them on adult contemporary radio as well. And if you want to go learn more about that song, go back into the archives and listen to our Phil Joel interview. We talk at length about that song and a lot of songwriting during that time versus the present day, and that's a fun conversation that we had with Phil. So where are they headed next? They had their heaviest album with Take Me to Your Leader. They get a little more poppier with Step Up to the Microphone. Are they going to return to some more rock? Are they continuing with some modern day, Smashing Pumpkins type pop? Nah, they're going to go do a disco album in 1999. November 16th, they released Love, Liberty, Disco.
This is one of the most bizarre trends. I wouldn't even call it a trend. It was just seemed like, what if we did a disco album? And they did. And how was it received by Jesus Freak Hideout?
Jesus Freak Hideout gave it 3.5 stars.
Okay.
And oddly enough, I think if that was gone back and listened to a lot of these, I think it would be a lot higher.
I'm still speechless at this album. Just that they disco.
Yeah, I this was a time where bands had more of a creative license. They were able to do things that were more creative. They were able to just, say, hey, what the heck? Let's just try something completely out of left field. And oddly enough, I think this album still holds up fairly well. I still don't really care that much about the title track, Love, Liberty, Disco. But I just really appreciate the band's creativity on this album. And again, no Steve Taylor on this. So they're doing all of this all themselves.
And if you really think about it, even today, people are releasing 90s style music because that's what they grew up with. Some guys that grew up in the 70s, and also I don't necessarily know the music scene in Australia, but maybe this was something that was near and dear to Peter Furler's heart as a young lad growing up in Australia, that this was a style of music they listened to. I have no idea, but they did what they wanted on this album.
Yeah, and there's a lot of really cool stuff that Jeff Frankenstein does with arranging a lot of the strings. Jody Davis has some of his best guitar work on this album. Phil Joel takes more of a songwriter role on this. You see Steve Hindalong from The Choir plays some guest percussion on a song called Break. So, it's fun that one of the most fun collaborations was John P. Key, an old gospel singer, helped write I Surrender All with Peter Furler. That's pretty cool.
Now, who's Philip Urey?
Philip Urey is Phil Joel.
Okay. Now, because I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh, it's Philip.
That's kind of like Kevin Max and Kevin Max Smith. They were both adopted, and
because I had no idea when I was like, where did this guy come from? Why can't I find him anywhere? Phil Joel,
or maybe he wasn't adopted, but that's Phil Joel was his stage name. I don't want to misspeak there. But yeah, this is the last album of the 90s.
It is.
How about that?
And then they kind of go into a decade almost of worship sounding albums, which we'll talk about maybe on another episode.
Yeah, we'll talk about that soon. If you want to hear more about our Take Me to Your Leader breakdown, which we're going to go track by track on, check out patreon.com/Decent Christian Talk. For as low as $1 a month, you can help us out, and we'd greatly appreciate that. Hey guys, we miss you. We love you. We are still praying for everybody. There's still a lot of uncertainty in the world today with the whole virus thing. Music for me is very therapeutic. Being able to go back and listen to some of this is a way that I deal with anxiety. It's a way that a lot of people do. I would encourage you to go back and listen to some of these songs. I Surrender All. I still get goosebumps listening to that song off Love, Liberty, Disco. And that's just, Break, Fall on You. Those songs are just, they hold up so well over time because they still talk about our reliance. We can't do it ourselves. We've got to surrender. We've got to give up our control. And, it's done a lot for me to listen to some of these songs this past week or two. What say you looking back on this era?
It's definitely something that I listened to, and it's just a good feeling. So like you said, maybe to kind of step outside of everything in the world today and just, go back. It's funny to think that this was a simpler time, but I was also at a simpler age at this point. But just some of these songs that I still know all the words to.
Yep.
Just, I don't know. Go back and listen to these. Like we've mentioned before, if you don't know anything about pre-Michael Tate Newsboys, then I'm sure you have the time on your hands to go do a deep dive. And some of it you might think, wow, this is awful. And then some of it you might find to be very enjoyable.
Yeah.
Are we rating these?
So now we've got to give our top 5. Thanks for reminding me.
It's important. Hey, it's the 25th. Happy Christmas.
Okay. So this is the hardest thing I've ever had to do.
I think.
Are we going to go 5? I give 5, you give 5. Is that what we're going to do?
I've got it. I'm in a toss up here. Okay. I think I've made my decision.
All right.
What my number 5 is going to be.
My number 5 is going to be Not Ashamed. There's a couple songs on this that I really, really love, and there's some songs on this that I just still kind of skip over. And even though this is the album that brought them to the dance, I think they were still trying to find themselves a little bit. And so I'm going to give this a number 5.
Okay. I'm going to make you mad here.
Okay.
Number 5 for me is Boys Will Be Boys.
Okay.
It probably would not have been my number 5 before this week, but just going back and listening to it, Kingdom Man.
It holds up better than I remember.
It does.
I agree.
Just some of the songs on that album, and of course, like I said, this is probably some of my earliest memories of the Newsboys. So just almost for purely nostalgic reasons, as well as Taste and See and the remix. This is going to be my number 5.
Okay. Well, my number 4, and this is so hard, but I'm going to have to say, I'm just going to say Love Liberty Disco.
Okay.
And that might change tomorrow. I don't know. But going back and listening to some of these, the title track for me, Love Liberty Disco, is not my favorite song. Good Stuff is not my favorite song. All the other stuff for me is really good, but I think those 2 tracks kind of hurt this album.
Okay. I'm going to make you mad again.
Okay.
Number 4, Step Up to the Microphone.
Wow.
This album, as you mentioned before, was kind of a step back from their harder sound. And that's what I really enjoyed about some of their previous albums.
Okay.
So this is a very good album. And I probably, if I listen to it even more now, I might appreciate it more. But I just remember I wasn't necessarily disappointed, but they were no longer one of my top. Like, this album was not my favorite album.
Okay.
But I really enjoyed it. But from here, what year was that? 1998. That's shortly after bands like Skillet and Project 86 and stuff like that started coming out.
Yeah.
So I was kind of taking a step in that direction while the Newsboys took a step in the opposite direction.
Okay. That makes sense. Number 3 for me, Going Public. This album, I can't believe how good this album still is.
Yeah.
I thought sometimes I think sometimes I'm guilty of lumping this in with like their early stuff, and I just forget how good it is. It's so good. There's not a bad song on this album.
It's
really
very
not.
deep. It's very good. What number are we at? Number 3?
3.
Number 3 for me is Hell is for Wimps. I'm kidding. My number 3 album is Not Ashamed. And I'm not making fun of Hell is for Wimps, but Not Ashamed is so good. This was hard, like you said. It's splitting hairs between this and my number 2. I had a clear number 1, but not Ashamed, like you said. You could listen to this album today, and it could be your number 2. I'll listen to it tomorrow, and my number 2 could take over. But it's just kind of splitting hairs there. Not Ashamed, my number 3.
All right. Number 2 for me, Step Up to the Microphone. For me, this album has gotten better over time. I was definitely disappointed with it initially, but songs like Entertaining Angels and so many of these deep cuts, Hallelujah, The Tide, Always. I mean, The Tide is, if you listen to The Tide, it's a really, really dark song. It really is. And I remember hearing and watching Always live, and I think you could probably find that on YouTube from One Night in Pennsylvania. And I remember, I wish they would release this in audio form, because the solo that Jody plays on this song live was incredible. And I can't remember who, but there's somebody that I've heard an interview with say like that's really big. Mm-hmm. And they said they remember going to this tour, and they remember seeing and hearing Jody play that solo on that song, and that's when they realized that that's what they wanted to do with their life, and they made it really big.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And I wish I could remember who that was. But
it's probably Bono. We'll just say it was Bono.
Entertaining Angels is just such a good song, man. It's such a good song. And it's, sometimes this album might be a little bit lower, but going back and listening to these songs like one after the other this past week, I think this is number 2.
All right, number 2 for me, Going Public.
Okay.
And like I said, it's just splitting hairs between this and Not Ashamed, but I kind of put Going Public a little bit ahead because of probably its popularity. Their song Shine alone really kind of catapulted them, but
yeah,
just a few of the things that they did. And LG is even a deep cut that I honestly am not as familiar with, but that's some of people's favorite songs. Yeah. So, Going Public, number 2.
All right, that takes us to our number 1, and I think we agree, unless you think Hell's for Wimps is number 1.
I also left Love Liberty Disco off my list.
You did. That's why I said I think.
Yes.
Take Me to Your Leader is my number 1.
Mine as well.
Okay. I didn't get to say this, but the album cover for this is the X-Pac 400 from the Battle of Arkarsh from a show from the 1960s.
An Alfred Hitchcock reference.
Yes. We'll leave it at that. If you want to hear more about this album, check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/Decent Christian Talk. If you want to hear more about the Newsboys, we're not done. We're going to have another episode about the 2000 Newsboys. That's 2000 from 2009. And we will unpack that very soon. So if you know any Newsboys fans, say, hey, check this episode out. You might like it.
Or if you know John James.
Yeah, if you know John James, tell him to give me an email.
Maybe not George Perdakis.
Hey, I'll talk to him.
I would, actually, yeah.
Or Peter Friller, either one. Hey, guys, thanks for checking us out. You can check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. We're on Facebook. We're going to have a nice poll about what's your favorite 90s albums or 90s Newsboys albums. I'm sure it won't be controversial at all.
Which
won't be as controversial as Josh Balog's.
Yeah, Josh Balog, I'm calling you out. If you're listening to this right now, I want to have you on the show to help us rank something. I don't care if it's Disney movies. I don't care if it is favorite flavors of ice cream. But if you do not know who Josh Balog is, he's one of the most controversial figures in the entire world on the internet. And he sits down and he most recently ranked every Reliant K song ever. I know.
Very controversially.
Very controversially. And just things like that. But the time and effort that he puts into some of this stuff is astounding. And I'm sure there are blood, sweat, and tears that are coming from his studio or wherever he's doing this writing. Because to choose between Reliant K songs and to consciously rank something below 100, how do you do that? And he has done it.
You're going to literally anger everybody.
You have to know when you put out, we ranked a top 5 here, and I'm sure some of you old Newsboys fans disagree with us wholeheartedly. Imagine ranking, maybe he'll rank every Newsboys song in history. Josh Balog, I'm calling you out. Newsboys.
At least 90s songs.
90 songs. Rank it.
All right, so, yeah. Hey, guys. Thanks for checking us out. We'll catch you next time.
Don't forget to tip your waiters and waitresses. Thanks.
Don't forget to tip your waiters and waitresses. Thanks.